This morning, as I was checking my email, I had my typical spoof email from Michelle, the sex worker, that emails me in a spoofing manner on occasion. And this has been going on for a couple years now. There's no meaningful dialogue. I don't respond. It's a guise being used by my hacker slash stalker. And for whatever reason, here we are 2 years later and it's still happening. I don't understand the purpose. It's very bizarre. And it's strange that I've reported so many of these activities, yet they're still happening. And as I was looking at the messages, I couldn't help but think, why is my stalker hacker not in prison yet? What is going on? Does anyone investigate crime anymore? Or do they just stay busy investigating victims? Is this a situation where everybody's been laid off? Is this a training issue? Is this an ethics issue? Is anyone able to decipher truth from lie? What is happening? And it's very strange that a victim can report to multiple entities, multiple levels of law enforcement, all the victimization that they're experiencing. But the reality is often our stories, the truth is stranger than fiction. What we're experiencing in these targeting situations, in these organized crime rings, these organized harassment groups, is so bizarre that it's unbelievable to the listener. The listener believes it to be implausible, and it's done that way intentionally so that the victim looks crazy when they try to explain what's happening to them behind the scenes, and a narrative has been painted ahead of them so that if the victim does come forward, it's too late. They've already been discredited by the organized crime ring who has painted this false narrative, provided a smear campaign, and made it next to impossible for the victim to get assistance. And more often than not, the victim's the one that's being falsely investigated based upon the fraud being committed or the conspiracy of that organized crime group. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the bizarre things that we experience, some of the mind games, the dirty games that are played by these organized crime rings that sound stranger than fiction, but are real in many of our stories. So the first is the pretend connection. And this is where someone will pretend to have a meaningful relationship with the targeted individual. They'll pretend to be their spouse or say, yeah, we had this long-term meaningful relationship. We lived together, we shared finances. I know all about them. I know their character. And meanwhile, the victims never met that person, or they went on 1 or 2 dates with them. That predator certainly knows nothing about the victim to be speaking about their personality or their habits or anything like that. And it could also be, a childhood friend that the victim knew, in elementary school and has stayed connected with on social media, but doesn't have any meaningful contact. They don't visit, they don't talk. It's been decades since they've had any interaction, but then that friend will say, yeah, I've known them since the 5th grade, as if they have meaningful information to offer about the personality, lifestyle, character of the victim, and they'll be used, bribed, or paid, promised things in the outcome of a case to provide false testimony, false claims to further paint and support that false narrative in the smear campaign. And it will be believable because, oh, it's coming from somebody that's known the victim for 35 years, or it's coming from their spouse, or it's coming from this person that lived with them and had a long-term relationship with them. And the reality is none of that is real. It's all pretend. And then there'll be the pretend financial support. So again, that fake spouse or that fake partner will say things like, yeah, they stole money out of our joint bank account and frauded me, or I've been paying all their bills, I send them money all the time, they're constantly asking me for money. It could be a family member that's in the process of trying to steal an inheritance or already has, and saying things like, yeah, I took control of their finances because I had to, because they couldn't manage them on their own, but I pay their bills every month, I take care of their rent, and they're constantly coming to me for money, and I'm here's some receipts. I'm paying their car insurance and I'm sending them money every month. And meanwhile, none of it's real. The reality is the predators, whether an ex, fake ex, family, whoever is involved in the scheme, is actually trying to get the victim fired from their job, ran out of their housing, financially totally destabilize their life, but yet portraying an image that they're financially supporting them. And I actually have received emails of receipts as if somebody is paying my car insurance and making purchases on my behalf, and I'm assuming that was for the purpose of the hidden court case and the false police investigations through fabricated receipts and evidence. And then there's the fabricated texts or email communication chains where the perpetrators, whoever their role may be, family or an ex or whoever's involved, will provide to law enforcement or a court system fake communications that portray the victim as if they're being threatening. And they'll play it out and say, oh, I'm in fear of my safety. Look at this threatening message that they're sending me. And they'll circulate that to extended family, to the church community, to the community in general, to get more people on board, to enlarge their numbers of supporters of this false narrative, because the more people they can get to be on this hate train and this vigilante justice campaign, the more believable it becomes. And they'll use manipulated communications to do so. And they'll also use manipulated communications or fabricated communication to portray the victim as being at risk of self-harm. They're so depressed and I'm worried they will do harm to themselves. They're threatening suicide. Look. And pretend concern to have justification to try to get that victim committed, or to label them as having mental instability to further discredit the victim, to further try to get rid of them so that they can proceed with whatever crimes, generally financial crimes, are happening behind the scenes, or to cover just their discriminatory acts and poor crimes and behavior to protect themselves. They'll even provide missing person claims. So a targeted individual may be staying away from families, establishing boundaries from people who've been abusive or unsafe, or from an ex or a stalker, whoever it may be. And the next thing the targeted individual knows is their face is on a milk carton as if they're a missing person. And this is done to locate the victim and to intimidate the victim. So the victim knows, okay, my stalker is still out there wanting me to know that they're looking for me, or this family member that I've cut off and haven't had contact with for a couple of years is making sure I know they're still in control, they're still locating me, and they'll do this through the false concern for welfare checks, to verify an address, and things like that. Pregnancy scams, and these can go both ways, male or female. It could be a female predator that pretends to be pregnant for financial gain or to hold on to a male, or it could be a male that's frauding everyone to get pity and saying, yeah, she's pregnant with my baby, or made a false claim that she was pregnant with my baby, and I'm concerned because she's acting unstable and on drugs and I can't find her. Can you help me find her? Can you watch her for me? Can you report back anything you know? And use that as a guise. And meanwhile, the targeted individual has no idea. There was never any pregnancy discussion, but it's being done to pull on the heartstrings of others. Oh my gosh, that's so horrible that she would lie to you or manipulate this, or I'm concerned for this unborn baby. We better track her, and take advantage of people to get more participants in the fraud scheme. Staged crimes. This is where the predator, will scratch or punch themselves and then go to police and be like, yeah, I was attacked. I'm so afraid for my safety. And they'll break into the victim's home and get clothing, personal items, shoes, hair out of their hairbrush, anything with DNA, to plant at the scene of a staged crime and then call law enforcement, totally manipulating. And setups for crimes are a big part of our story, because they're either trying to establish that the victim is mentally unstable and get them institutionalized, or get them falsely imprisoned, because then it becomes much easier to get away with all that they've done. The victim becomes uncredible in any testimony or statements that they try to provide, and it's a very deviant and insidious tactic in many, many targeting situations. And there's the efforts to get the victim investigated. So the predators will project all of their behavior. They'll take the scenario that happened with the victim and they'll tell it in the exact opposite way. So the victim who may have been assaulted, who may be being stalked, who's been the true victim, that predator will portray the exact opposite, as if they're the victim and that they were assaulted and woe is me, protect me, and get law enforcement to help them by investigating the victim. And now law enforcement's not looking at the true predator, and they'll run to law enforcement to get ahead of the victim, so the victim has no opportunity to even be believed by the time they get the courage to come forward. It's very deviant. There's predator-led investigation. So as they've achieved all this manipulation and they've pulled on the heartstrings of community members and extended family and gotten all these other people who are literally supporting this false narrative based solely on lies and the smear campaign, nothing factual, or if they've seen a fabricated message, they're jumping on board. There's been no verification of facts. And at this point, the predators just sitting back, enjoying leading this wild goose chase and watching the victim be investigated while no one's looking at them. All attention's on the victim, and now the predators really can go to town on fraud and crimes, engaging in financial crimes in the victim's name, setting the stage even further to entrap the victim. They have gotten all focus off of them. So even if the victim is saying, they assaulted me, they're stalking me, they were the ones that were violent with me, they brandished a weapon, no one's believing them, no one's helping them, and now the victim's been completely ostracized, has no support, whereas the abuser has the support of a large population because of their manipulation. There is intentional delay. So the goal is to run out the statute of limitations. So if those who have committed the real crimes can delay investigation, keep the focus off of them, and run out the time for prosecution from anything that they've done, that's the intention. Or if there is fraudulent and corrupt law enforcement involved, they may not investigate or take their sweet time to delay in order to take advantage of the statute of limitations, so that those who are truly guilty go without punishment. This can also happen in a probate case where it's a hidden case and the victim's not been served or given opportunity to participate, and the family will file continuing delays in the case to continue it, draw out that time until the victim gets to the point where when they finally learn about it, the statute of limitations has already reached its limit and they have no recourse to try to defend the fact that they've been stolen from, things that they were supposed to inherit, whether it be property, land, whatever it may be, has been taken. There's no time, the time's run out to do anything about it, and it's intentionally done that way. Sexual orientation claims. This is common in an ex-narcissist partner that doesn't want their past partner to have anyone have interest in them or date them. So they'll lie and say they have a different sort of sexual orientation than they actually do, or they'll fabricate AI-generated evidence and documentation in all the weird spoof emails. I'm being portrayed as if I'm interested in women. It's all part of their smear campaign and their narrative, because then they can get the more conservative community members and family members and religious members to feel even further justified in their attacks on the victim, because now it's a matter of, we think you're sinning because of your sexual orientation, and now we're justified even more so in abusing this person. they'll go on a literal witch hunt by claiming the victim is an actual witch. You know, they'll hack into their devices and into their email and their search history and go, oh, I see they looked at a tarot reader in their search history. They're a witch. And again, those conservative community members, those conservative church members will jump on board and think, oh yeah, we've got to get them out of this community, or they don't deserve to live. We've got to really rid them of existence because they're a witch and they're a danger to society. Meanwhile, the victim's at home crocheting an Afghan and has no idea this is going on. Business contracts, doing business in the victim's name. They'll set up, this organized crime ring will establish a business, an LLC. They'll conduct business in the victim's name as if the victim owns the company. They'll enter into contractual business agreements on behalf of the victim. Meanwhile, the victim has no knowledge, and the perpetrators are not paying taxes, they're not handling the business properly, and then it all falls upon the victim who had no idea this was even happening. In exploitation situations where a handler has obtained images and footage unlawfully of the victim and sold them, they may come up with a forged contract, a contractual agreement. Oh, I'm their manager, I'm their agent, they agreed for me to sell their nude photos. Here's their signature, and continue the fraud in that manner. There is the Britney of the IT, where they try to Britney Spears the targeted, not the IT, excuse me, the TI, the targeted individual, you know, in fake conservatorships and guardianships. So they fabricated these receipts and made it look like, you know, they're paying the victim's rent. They'll work with the landlord and have the landlord stalking and reporting and tracking the victim, putting recording devices, allowing unlawful access into the residence, and then pay or bribe that landlord with funds, and then turn around and say, oh, those funds were just to pay the victim's rent. They can't even take care of themselves. They can barely dress themselves, let alone pay their own bills. We need to take control of their finances. We've already established through these fake text messages and communications and all the people that have lied in the smear campaign, they're mentally unstable. So it's completely justified in this hidden court case that we take everything that belongs to them and control their finances, control their life in any way that we possibly can. There could be forgery, false power of attorney, you know, forged documents that give access to HIPAA-protected medical or mental health records as if the victim has agreed to this, or forgery handing over property, or getting a mortgage in the victim's name as if the victim has knowledge of it when they don't, forging their signature to conduct business, to make it look like they're signing property and assets over to someone to control, that they've consented to the release of their personal protected records to someone. And the thing that's most concerning about this is if there's a hidden court case and a targeted individual is not there with a verified identity that to confirm, yes, I signed this power of attorney. Yes, I signed over this property. I just didn't want the burden of these assets. I just wanted to give them away. It's questionable that a court of law would admit evidence that's fabricated, that's not been verified by the victim, a signature that's not been verified by the victim, that it would be allowed to go this far. That's really concerning. Illegal evidence, again, and that's, you know, hacking into people's devices, the targeted individuals' devices, cloning them, putting cameras in their home, their car, obtaining footage that's illegal. The handler will get recordings and images of the victim, and then those will be provided to law enforcement or to the court of law, again, who has a responsibility if they're receiving images that portray a victim as being a sex worker on a sex site. Are you receiving evidence that's proof that they're being exploited, or are you actually receiving valid evidence? And in the instance where that's not being verified, if the evidence is not being firmly verified, you know, where's the phone records that show these text messages actually were exchanged? Where's the backup, the supporting documentation? Where's the targeted individual to provide testimony? And of course they'll say, oh, they're sick and on their deathbed, or we can't find them. They're a missing person. They're homeless. They don't have a mailing address. And they've already set the stage to orchestrate this whole scenario to accomplish their deviant plans. And then they'll make efforts to shadow ban the victim. So if they provided a smear campaign that paints the victim in a certain light, they certainly can't have you showing up on social media functioning, looking normal, healthy, like a typical person that is just functioning and living their life. They'll go to great lengths to get those participants in the crime ring, the smear campaign. I need you all to report their page, or we're going to shadow ban and put weird comments or hide from the user their content. Do all sorts of things. If they're on a platform, try to silence them and take away their freedom of speech, especially if that victim's speaking up and saying, I need help. This is what's happening to me. No one's helping me. And at this point, they've been isolated, alienated from everyone because of how far the predators have gotten up to this point. And then they'll go so far as to get the victim blacklisted, calling every level of law enforcement and making reports on the victim that are false. They'll go so far as to contact TSA to watch for the victim at the airport, to track them, to see if they travel using their connections, their network. They'll contact Homeland Security, they'll go to the government, they'll go to high-powered positions within the community and tell their sob stories as if they're the victim, and we're just so concerned about this individual and they're a danger to the community, we need your help, and we'll enlist high-powered people to aid and abet in these large-scale conspiracies, these large-scale crimes. So I just think it's important to touch on some of these more bizarre activities that occur in many of our cases, because when we try to explain what's happening, it doesn't sound believable, but the reality is many of these things are actually occurring in these targeting situations. And because of the volume of people that are behind the fraud, that are behind the crimes, it's very difficult for the victim to get any kind of help because they've been isolated. The predators have gotten ahead of them by going to law enforcement first and painting that false narrative in a very believable way with false testimony, false evidence. And then by the time the victim comes forward and asks for help, it's too late. They're already being investigated as if they're the predator. And it's very dangerous, it's very unjust, and it just leads to secondary victimization of a victim who's already suffered so much at the hands of these predators.